So today we're going to be talking about extroversion. Extroversion is the trait that is about being social, being energetic, wanting to be around people versus wanting to be alone. Extroversion is one of the three activity factors that's referred to in the HEXACO model. So that the the activity factors, openness, conscientiousness, and extroversion, they're all about some version of being active and using energy. Openness to experience is just about trying new things. Conscientiousness is about work ethic, and extroversion is about uh, doing work with people. I mean, it's work of a different kind. You can be very playful while being high in extroversion, but extroversion is about, do you use energy to socialize with other people or not? Extroversion is one of the factors that pops up both in the HEXACO model and in the five-factor personality model, and it's basically the same in both. The sub-factors have been rebranded and repurposed a bit, but they're basically the same thing. So the sub-factors for extroversion, within the HEXACO model, it's um, there's four sub-factors, just like with the other factors in the model I talked about. So the first sub-factor for extroversion is called social self-esteem, which is basically about positive self-regard. Uh, People who are high in this sub-factor consider themselves to have likable qualities, whereas low scores tend to not see themselves as attractive. Um, they might see themselves as worthless in the worst cases, and just don't regard themselves as being popular. You could think of this as being a general want to present yourself to other people in the first place. Um, the second subfactor is social boldness, which is about being confident and comfortable in social situations. So it's basically, do you like being part of a group? Do you feel like being the leader? This is the assertiveness subfactor from the five-factor model. The In that one, there's a subfactor called assertiveness, which would be very similar to social boldness. I'm not sure why they didn't just call it assertiveness in this one. Maybe they were trying to uh, present theirs as being unique or something. But anyway, you get the idea. This is the want to be the leader, basically. Um, so they'll the you can tell when people are high in this subfactor because they're not shy and they always want to be the one in control of the group. So now moving on to the third one, which is the third subfactor within HEXACO extroversion, which is called sociability. Sociability is a tendency to want to be around people. It's not focused on assertiveness or being bold. It's just, do they enjoy being around people or not? So it's are they talkative? Do they enjoy conversation? Do they enjoy social interaction? Do they want to go to parties? Um, and if they're low in sociability, then they'll prefer solitary activities. They don't seek out conversation. Um, Whereas in the high case, they'll be about talking and visiting and celebrating with others. Um, so moving on to the fourth subfactor, which is called liveliness. Liveliness is about the direct energy of the person. So it's how enthusiastic they are, how cheerful they are. Um, how vibrant and dynamic they are. Do they wear colorful clothing? That's one way you could tell if they're high in this sub factor. Because with extroversion, one thing is that they'll generally people want to wear bright and vibrant clothing, as part of the factor. That's something that correlates, and liveliness is the sub factor within that. Well, as HEXACO presents it, liveliness is the sub factor within that sort of handles that kind of thing. They're very people who are lively. They're very very cheerful. They're flamboyant. Um, yeah. Optimism and high spirits is also something that is in liveliness. Although I think that social boldness and social self-esteem probably have a lot to do with optimism as well. So those are the four sub factors of extroversion. Um, Generally, the U.S. is a very extroverted culture. That's been my experience, just living in this country. Being an autistic person as I am, it's actually been rather difficult for me, even in a place like Seattle, to just be recognized, because it's expected that everyone is supposed to want to form a social network, and people who are low in extroversion are often attacked and regarded as selfish just because they like being by themselves. Um, I, I've heard that in Eastern cultures, extroversion is actually less important. The introversion is actually seen as being kind of a strength over in those parts of the world, which is interesting. So you see this kind of contrast between generally the West and the East. Um, uh, the way that the U.S. manifests stage orange, and of course the U.S. is very spiral dynamic stage orange. I won't go into orange too deeply. I've put an episode about it in my spiral dynamics series, so go watch that. But the way that uh, the U.S. manifests stage orange, which basically it's about technological business sort of perspective, is very extroverted. It's all about presenting yourself, and it's about being successful on social media and sorts of things, where in other parts of the world, orange is manifested differently as more being about invention and being novel and unique. And I think one thing that's going on in the US is sort of like this tribalism sort of thing. You're expected to be in some particular tribe, liberal versus conservative, and within those you have these different subgroups. Um, because there's a lot of social stuff. You're always supposed to belong to some sort of group. So the way that the U.S. does orange is very extroverted, and it's contrasted with other parts of the world. So now I'm going to go into the parts of the continuum that I've divided the spectrum into. So these are just broad regions within the extroversion spectrum, as I did with the two factors I've talked about before this. I'm just going to go through broad regions based on my own research, and also to a large extent my own experience and some intuition. So it's don't take this too technically. This is just um, my take, and to try to give you an idea of what various different regions on extroversion look like, because it's none of these factors are an either or thing. They're all um, they're all normally distributed. They all follow a bell curve. So it's not, are you an extrovert or an introvert? It's um, are you an extrovert? If so, how much? Are you an introvert? How much? And how frequently does that introvert have extroversion tendencies? It's that kind of thing. So I'm going to start very far at the low end, and I know quite a bit about the low end actually, because I'm an autistic person, and I actually started life as being extremely, extremely low in extroversion. So I'm going to do something unusual for these uh, continuum regions where usually it ranges between plus and -3, but in this case, for extroversion, I'm actually going to do a -4 because -4 is something I know about. So -4 is what I refer to as nonverbal, and it's about not using speech. It's not the same as not knowing how to talk. People who are nonverbal can and often do have a knowledge of words, and they have a knowledge of language and can be very intelligent. It's just that they don't talk, either because they just don't know what to do around people, or they just don't see it as important. When you're nonverbal, um, it's just sort of um, a modality of not wanting to engage with other people at all. Um, it's oh gosh, it's really hard to describe. Um, it's like you know what words are, you think in words, but it's just you don't want to use them. Um, you you prefer not to talk at all. Talking feels strange to you. That's one thing about nonverbal. It feels kind of strange, and it's like an anxiety. It's like an anxiety when you try to say something to people, um, and it's like your subconscious is like resisting you. It's oh gosh, it's really hard to describe. It's um, you know, ironically, the nonverbal region, it's hard to put into words. It's pardon the pun, but it is hard to put into words. I don't know. Maybe I might talk about this more in other episodes after the series because it's really hard to talk about. So moving up to -3, the -3 region is what I call isolation seeking. Isolation seeking people, they do use words, they do talk, but they're extreme loners. You'll always find them by themselves. You'll always find them doing their own thing. I still have some of this region myself, although I think I've moved a bit further rightward in extroversion toward the others above it. But isolation seeking, it's just you'll almost never find them around people. When you do engage with them, they will talk with you, but they'll use words only uh, very very briefly, and their sentences will tend to be uh, very poignant, or not poignant, but um, they'll they'll be very they won't use very many words, so it's um, you ask them about something in their life, and it'll be like yes, or it'll be like Tuesday, or they'll give very brief answers. So it's like having conversations, but at the same time, it's the conversations are going to be over very quickly, and it's common for people in -3 to actually just like be terrified of people. It's not the same as being high in emotionality. It's not uh, afraid of things generally. It's just an extreme want to not be around people. So now we're moving up again to -2, which is loner. So loners are not people who are like terrified of people or anything. Loners are just they have a general want for isolation, but you can have a normal conversation with them. I probably would be a -2 myself. Like I can have in-depth conversations with people, but I prefer to keep the social group to like 1 to 2 people. I generally don't like groups that have more than that. And uh, I don't really care about what what the group wants to do. I don't care about what things are socially in, or what things are trending, um, or what kinds of songs are cool. I don't do any of that. It's wanting to do my own thing, unless it's a friend group that's very close by, a friend group of just like a few people. So that's the loner. Moving up again, we have solitude oriented. So now we're getting more mainstream into the extroversion factor. Solitude oriented is people who, sometimes you can find them at parties, but it's going to be rather infrequent. Um, for people who are solitudinal, it's they'll be in the social group, and they can be in a modestly sized one, but they'll always be at the fringes of it. So these are the people who stand by in the background. Um, the people who they'll be among the last people that you meet in some social gathering, but on the other hand, you will meet them in the first place, which is something that would not generally be true of the ones that I covered before this. So you will find them at the social gathering. They'll just be among the last you meet. They will not talk that much, but you will have a normal conversation with them. Um, and they'll they'll be the ones who I think you get the idea. So now we're going to move forward to the balanced state, the region 0, which is called the ambivert, which is someone who's both an extrovert and an introvert at the same time. And it's sort of like the survivalistic region for the H factor, in the sense that with the H factor, I mean that's a different factor. It covers different things, but the the aspect that's similar is that um, they behave one way when they can, and they behave the other way when it suits them. And similarly, for the ambivert region in extroversion, an ambivert, they'll behave extroverted when it suits them, and they'll behave introverted when it suits them, and you won't be able to pin them down one way or the other. So they'll be in the middle of the group in terms of how much you meet them. They're sort of like the um, if you measure the amount of friends that someone has, then the ambivert is going to be right in the middle of that bell curve. Generally, I mean, in the U.S., they'll probably actually be a little bit below that because, as I mentioned before, the U.S. has a generally quite extroverted culture. But, globally speaking, the ambivert is going to be the one who has the average number of friends. Sometimes they're vibrant. They do have their vibrant moments, but they also have their shy, quiet, and reserved moments. So now moving up again, we have the +1, which is people interested. So people interested are people who are generally social, they're vibrant, they're loud, but not enormously so. This is probably around the average for people in the US. I mean, maybe a little bit above the average for people in the US. It's kind of hard to say that the US is probably like plus a half or plus 0.7 or something. But for the +1 people interested, it's rather similar. So for people interested, um, they're they're the ones who are they do their own thing, but when they do their own thing, they'll generally try to find a way of relating it to other people, because being the group is how their perspective is now centered. Um, So they won't be at the very top of the group, but they will be among the first people that you meet. And within the friend circle of people who are in the +2 and +3, it's these +1 people, interested people, who are going to be the immediate next ones further out in that circle. So the way that social globs generally form, the people who are highest in extroversion are at the very center. They have the most connections. Moving out from that, you have the next ring, the next outer circle of people who have slightly fewer connections, and those spread out further to circles further out in the network that have fewer connections and fewer. Um, and so the plus ones are going to be the people who are uh, right right beneath the people who directly control the group. So now moving up again to plus two, we have people centered. People centered are people who, as the title suggests, they put the center. They put social networking and social get-togethers as their main way of life. So plus twos are people who, excuse me, they plus twos are people who directly control the group. These are the social leaders, the people who are the most assertive. They're talkative, they're vibrant, they're enthusiastic, they're energetic, they're cheerful, generally speaking. They're going to be the social administrators, the people who manage other people and tell them what to do. I mean, that part actually depends a little bit on their conscientiousness, because people who are good group leaders tend to be high in both extroversion and conscientiousness, which is a factor I'll talk about in the future, which is about being focused and work oriented, which is an important thing for managing basically anything. Uh, so you'll always be able to tell when someone is plus two, because they're very loud, and they're sort of in your face, and they want to make sure they get to know everyone. And if there's one person in your community that basically everyone has heard of, assuming they're like not some sort of uh, uh, saint or super genius or something, and they're just like a normal person who nevertheless everyone in the community knows, it's impossible not to learn about this person within 5 minutes, then it's a certain estimation that they're going to be high in the extroversion factor. So I think you get the idea about people centered. They're the people right at the middle, or not the middle, the very center, the very core of the social network. Um, so moving even further, you have people who are super stimulated. So super stimulated is people who are high enough in extroversion that it's actually kind of a problem. They don't know how to be by themselves. They feel very incomplete without other people. Um, they ADHD is something that has a lot to do with the extroversion factor. Not so much ADD, because ADD is mostly just about focus in general, but ADHD, are they hyperactive? They're sort of unfocused in the sense that they don't know what to do with their energy, because their extroversion has far outpaced their conscientiousness, and so they sort of radiate and just throw around their energy all over the place. They're loud to the point of being obnoxious. They're the people who never stop talking, oftentimes annoying the rest of the group. They're extroverted to the point where it's become unwieldy and a little bit of a problem, I suppose you could say. Um, People who you'll hear them from across the block. Uh, so I think you get the idea. So these are broad regions, and of course, um, these are just very, very general cases. Everyone is going to have various different characteristics from multiple of these regions. For any given person, there's generally a bell curve where they're centered for some reason, but some region, but they also have some elements from the regions directly to the left and right of their center. So in my case, I'm generally a loner, I'm in -2, but I have some elements from the -3 isolation seeking and some elements from solitude oriented. And for other people who are centered in different places on the continuum, it works basically the same way. Um, so let's see. Extroversion, the excesses of it focus around being hyperactive. They focus around being um, uh, they don't know what to do with themselves when they're not around other people, and when there's no one else around, they're always really busy. They're really active. People who are high in extroversion, generally what they find important is that they build their way of life around what the rest of the group is doing. If there's some music that's popular or some piece of entertainment that's popular, then they'll join that piece of entertainment just because they want to. Um, they tend to wear vibrant clothing and brilliant colors, whereas people who are low in extroversion tend to wear more plain clothing, like what I'm wearing right now. And people who are low in extroversion generally, they're not very decorative, they're not very cheerful or vibrant, and that actually can make it very difficult for them in the job world because getting a job, which is something I'm actually trying to do, get a job in science, um, it's about getting noticed, and people who are high in extroversion tend to have that they get noticed more just because they're more interested in people and more interested in what the group is doing. Relating this to spiral dynamics, it is generally the case that the communally oriented perspectives tend to be higher in extroversion than the individualistic perspectives. Um, Now, of course, that's not an absolute thing. You can be in an individualistic perspective and extroverted. It's just less likely. And relating that back to what I referred to the United States, where the United States is what I see as being extremely stage orange, which is individualistic, but at the same time, it's a high extroversion manifestation of that, such that it's all about social media, it's all about technology that's being used to build the social network as opposed to the technology being used to just do other things that aren't about networking. Because, like with the stuff just regarding Facebook, which is a very orange institution, but it's orange in a way that it's sort of like a mind virus. I don't do Facebook anymore because there's some very unethical things that came out about them, and they're all relating to Facebook having figured out how to uh, take advantage of the social tendencies of neurotypicals. Neurotypicals are just not non-autistic people. Uh, but Facebook, it basically it it figured it, the way that Facebook works, it's all set up so that when you join some organization on Facebook, you're going to be led down a path that gets you into the most extreme viewpoint, the most tribalistic viewpoint. And the reason why it does that, and the reason why it works so well, and why people in the US are so susceptible to it, is because they are generally high in extroversion, and because of that, um, their ingrained want to be part of the social group is something that Facebook sort of puts this mind virus in, this mind virus that takes them over until they get led down this basically a path of radicalization toward the extreme right wing or the extreme left wing. I think the extreme right wing probably has more problems with this just because of general low consciousness and general unawareness, but it is possible to get radicalized among the extreme left as well, like with Antifa, or in some cases the Young Turks, although I actually kind of like the Young Turks. Don't take that too seriously, although the way that the Young Turks is trying to managed stage green. It's sort of like a radicalized form of green, where it's that they want to just tear down all the orange institutions without having any regard for what those institutions are supposed to do. I mean, yes, the orange institutions in the country are being very dysfunctional right now, but the Young Turks and other extreme left-wing institutions want to just destroy all of it, and it's a mistake. And on the extreme right, oh my God, I'm not even going to get started about the extreme right of QAnon. Well, QAnon is just this perfect manifestation of what social media platforms like Facebook have done, this extreme radicalization where these people who are generally conservative leaning get led down this path where they get they get led to social groups that are extreme right, and then that leads to more that are more extreme right, and pretty soon you have people believing that uh, the Democratic Party is like controlled by what is it, serial rapists or something, or and like lizard men, or whatever the fuck it is they believe. They're just completely insane, and it all started just by having their extroversion get taken advantage of. Basically, I mean, their low consciousness to begin with is something that made them more susceptible to the mind virus, but it's it's more just about being being a high extroversion human being, neurotypical, and uh, having having all of that just get taken advantage of and taken over by uh, orange institutions that basically use social media as a weapon. So I don't post my episodes on Facebook anymore because I don't want to have anything to do with Facebook anymore. Uh, so yeah, I think I've talked quite enough about that particular topic. Um, Regarding autism, I do want to say this about autism, that autism, um, a lot of the reason for why autism might seem nebulous as it's rendered in the US, I think may have a large part to do with the fact that a lot of people who I would consider not autistic um, end up getting lumped in with people who are autistic simply because they are low in extroversion. They're introversion oriented, and the American culture doesn't really understand that. And American culture is just like, that person seems shy and reserved, and they don't really like being around people. That must mean they have autism, and that's not how it works. And it makes me angry when I see things like this, and people with PhDs who have no idea what they're doing, and they just lump people in groups with autistic people simply because they might take longer to engage with other people. It doesn't mean they're actually autistic. It just means that they're a neurotypical who's introverted, and it just seems ridiculous to me that this kind of thing happens, but it does. Um, so yeah, that's what I wanted to say on that. So this is the extroversion factor. Now, of course, all of the factors in this model, particularly the ones that directly relate to the five factor as well, they're extremely complex, and I could have talked a lot more about extroversion. Um, for example, in the five factor model, they actually have a version of it that has six subfactors instead of four. So there's a lot more I could have said. This is, even though this has now gone on for more than half an hour, this is really a very general overview of the extroversion factor, and it is well worth you doing your own research so that you can get an even better idea of what this thing is all about. Because, like, especially just like in the modern world, extroversion is probably one of the more important factors to be aware of. Another one I'd say is really important is openness to experience, and also honesty, humility. Those three are the really big ones that you'll want to be paying attention to. Um, Yeah, the next episode after this is going to be agreeableness, just because that's the next one in the acronym of HEXACO, HEXACO. The episode after this is agreeableness, then conscientiousness, and then finally we'll do openness to experience, which is one that I do want to talk about, openness, because that has a lot to do with consciousness and spiral dynamics. But anyway, that's all for now. So, yeah.